and helping us every Sunday get ready for our liturgy. But this is Nancy Curry, who sings soprano in the choir and runs the church.
I asked you if I could make a pitch this morning. On the 19th of August, we'll be having our annual Clean the Sanctuary Day, and we're there from 8 until noon. I make sure we have all the supplies. So we have all the cleaning rags, all the polish. We finally, 2 years ago, got all the pews refinished. It took us 4 years to get all the pews totally refinished. We didn't do it, but they could only do 1 or 2 at a time because of weddings and funerals and all everything else. So once they got all of the pews refinished, now I don't have to polish the pews. So that gives a little more time. But we still polish the walls and behind the ministers, the regal, and we polish all the railings and the pulpit and the choir loft. Then the other big project I'm now tackling, since we're not doing the pews, is cleaning the cushions. Because those of you that come on Christmas Eve know how many candles there are, and there's a lot of wax left on those cushions after December. And the staff go in and do what they can to brush it off and vacuum, but it still sticks. So over the last few years, we would get a few of the cushions done. You have to take an iron paper towels. So you put a paper towel down, put the iron down, and you just flat soak it up. It's not difficult, but it's tedious. And so the more people I can have come, and I'll try to make sure we have enough ironing boards and irons. I have discovered I have at least 6 plugs in the sanctuary. Double plugs.
How many?
There's 2 on each of the aisles. There's 1 or 2 in the back, and then there's some in the northern side. So if I have that many plugs, and I can put 2 irons on each plug and 2 ironing boards, we could do it. So, if you can give me an hour, if you can give me all 4 hours, I'm here the whole time. I know some people can only do a little bit, but as many people as come, we can tackle this and get those cushions a little bit cleaner. We clean them as much as we can on one side, and if we don't get the other side, we just flip them over. I'll keep going. So I would appreciate it if you could come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The group is called the Holy Dusters. How are you? Good? So, that's a joke for the end. No matter who you are, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. Okay. There are some books, I'm thinking mostly of novels, that begin with a prologue. You know, they have a little epigram sometimes. Sometimes before each chapter they have a prologue. And I'm currently reading a great novel by Frederick Backman. You know him? He is the guy who wrote A Man Called Ovi. You're reading Bear Country. Bear Town. It's a great book. It's different from the other 3. The characters are different. And I wanted to read to you the prologue to this novel. Because, you know, the prologue is designed to get your attention. This is it. Late one evening, toward the end of March, a teenager picked up a double-barrel shotgun, walked into the forest, put the gun to someone else's forehead, and pulled the trigger. This is the story of how we got here. I mean, that grabs your attention. So the prologue for this talk is the text from the Gospel of Thomas we are up to for today. And I want to warn you, it has language you don't often hear in church. And indeed, much of the content of today's talk will be information that you are not likely to hear in many Christian churches. So here's the text. Yeshua says, the one who knows his true father and mother will be called the son of a whore. And you don't hear the word whore often in church, especially in reference to Jesus. But actually, the word whore and the concept of whoring play a significant part in prophetic Jewish thought. And this talk is a meditation on how we got here. Now, one answer to how we got here, generally speaking, is that I have taken seriously my own spiritual teachers who have convinced me that if any wise and useful religious or spiritual tradition has any kind of future at all, it will be because the people in that tradition are open to the mystical, non-dual side of their religion. When I started talking about non-duality and mysticism in here, some of you sent me a very famous quote on mysticism by Karl Rahner. Karl Rahner, who died in 1984, was a German Jesuit who was considered one of the most influential theologians of the 20th century. He got off some great lines, hearkening back to the time that we spent last week talking about prayer. Rahner said, when a person is with God in awe and love, then that person is praying. And another Karl Rahner line is, the number one cause of atheism is Christians. Those who proclaim him with their mouth and deny him with their actions is what an unbelieving world finds unbelievable. And then there's this one for our work today and our work in general. In the days ahead, you will either be a mystic, that is, one who has experienced God for real, or you will be nothing at all. Now, the other way that we got here is that I decided some time ago to, as part of my own exploration in the arena of mysticism, to undertake a study of the Gospel of Thomas. And I don't know whether this next line will be greeted with applause or not, but in not too many weeks, we will be finished with the exploration of the Gospel of Thomas. And someone asked me a few weeks ago, when you're done with Thomas, what are you going to do next? And I said, it's a secret. We could go back, I'm not going to do this, but we could go back to the beginning of Thomas and start all over again. It would be different, because we're different, and our world is different. And I'm not going to do this today, but at some point I want to talk with you about the 4 different levels at which sacred texts can be read, whether you're reading them from the Hebrew scriptures, then Buddhism, something from Islam, whatever. Two of the people who have had a very, very profound impact on my life are Thich Nhat Hanh and Thomas Merton. It is safe to say that there is not a day that passes that I don't read something by both of these people. Every day. I read Merton's prayer every day, which I read to you before. I read some of the material that I've gotten over the years from Thich Nhat Hanh's various writings. I first encountered him back in the 70s. I've told this story before, it's not in my notes, but I went to this conference on the practice of mindfulness and psychotherapy, and Merton was, Thich Nhat Hanh was presenting. He's a Buddhist monk that was in the Buddhist monks that were exiled from Vietnam because they wouldn't take sides during the conflict. And so periodically he would come to the United States to raise money for the cause of working with orphan children in France. And he lives he's now very near death. And Merton, of course, is dead. So he would come over to the United States and do these conferences, and I went to this conference called The Practice of Mindfulness in Psychotherapy, and one time there was a Q&A, and some woman, I'm convinced because of the way she dressed and talked, she was from California, and she asked Thich Nhat Hanh, how do you suggest we deal with patients who have difficulty with anger? Because, you know, anger is a chief corrosive for Buddhist spirituality. They have a very definite stance about anger. Thich Nhat Hanh's accent was very difficult to understand, made it very difficult to understand. I think he had difficulty understanding us. And he finally asked this woman, he said, well, what do you do now with people who have anger problems? And she said, well, we get them to express it. And he said, how do you do that? And she said, well, we seat them on the floor and we put in front of them a pillow, big pillow, and we give them a padded bat called a pataka. And we ask them to hit the pillow over and over and over and over until they get their anger out, until they express their anger. What do you think of that? And Thich Nhat Hanh got right in her face and took his finger and said, I think you better talk to Pillow. See what Pillow think about that. So, Merton, near the end of his life, he died in an accidental electrocution in Bangkok, attending an interreligious conference. But near the end of his life, Thich Nhat Hanh in the United States went to Gethsemane Monastery in Kentucky to visit with Merton, and they talked about interfaith stuff. And Merton asked Thich Nhat Hanh, you work with these orphan young children whose parents have put them, or others have put them in a monastery. How do you teach them meditation practice? And Thich Nhat Hanh said, we don't teach meditation to the young monks. They are not ready for it until they stop slamming doors. I think that's a great metaphor for our spiritual practice and living our lives. It's a risky metaphor, as I suppose all metaphors are, because it can lead to the notion that if you perform some sort of behavior, it can make you good or right or any other of the tricks the ego wants to play on us to separate us from our true selves and from each other. But there's even a certain degree of truth in the metaphor of behaving, because many psychologists will tell you that you behave yourself into a new way of thinking rather than think yourself into a new way of behaving. But that is the risk of morality. Here's a list of things that you need to do, and if you do them, you will make yourself a better person. And the ego uses religion and religious practices like that all the time. So I guess there is no better way to remain unconscious than to bless some religious practice or doctrinal position as having made us right or safe, and that way we can go on living our lives slamming doors. It's easy for the ego to protect itself from self-discovery. I know this to be true because I do it. Richard Rohr once said, what you are involved in for your religious or spiritual practice is designed to give you status, stability, and security, you are walking the wrong path. So Thich Nhat Hanh might say, quit slamming doors, and then you can enter into the kindergarten of spirituality. The spiritual teachings that transform us are those that move us to higher levels. And paradoxically, We have to move to higher levels in order to understand the deeper meaning of the spiritual teaching. It's both at the same time. And the teaching that we are going to look at today from the Gospel of Thomas is going to require a lot from some of you, maybe not so much from some of you, because the teaching is calling us to be progressively more conscious of and in touch with our true identity. That's what this teaching is about. And when that knowledge, of course, is complete, we can be said to be enlightened. I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody who made it there. But this teaching gets at the core of who we truly are. So let's talk about whore. The word whore, in some form, is used in the Jewish Christian writings over 125 times. It's mostly used as a metaphor for the people of God when they have been unfaithful to God. One of the biting but great prophetic books in the collection of Jewish writings is a book called Hosea. And in Hosea, Hosea metaphorically marries a whore. And that's a way of communicating God's willingness to embrace and include everybody, no matter what their moral status may be in the community or in the world or wherever. It's a great book. You should read it. So, even then, we're talking thousands of years ago, the word faith was about being faithful to someone. And I want to talk for a few minutes about what it means to have faith. The word faith, I have faith, has at least 4 meanings. First of all, it means to believe something is true. It's to assent to something. Some people say things like, I have faith in the Bible. Or, I believe Jesus was born of a virgin. These are examples of assenting to something. And when people do that, they say that they have faith. This meaning of the word faith, by the way, is very recent in human history. It is also a very Protestant word. It grew out of the battle cry of the Protestant Reformation, and it was a battle. The battle cry was, the just shall live by faith. The just are saved by faith. And because different people had different views of what was true after the Reformation, different positions were taken about what was important. And the great cost of the Reformation to what became the Protestant or protesting side of the church was that the church lost any sense of central authority except for the Bible, which you were free to interpret any way you wanted to. That's why we have so many divergent opinions, so many different denominations. Of course, immediately after the Protestant Reformation, the confessing church became known as the Lutheran Church. And out of that, of course, there was a split out of that. We have the Presbyterians that come out of that. Some denominations develop not out of doctrinal differences, but out of cultural, political, geographical, personal morality issues. Like the Church of England, which came into existence because the king wanted to get married and the Roman Church wouldn't approve of it, so he just made up another church. That's pretty cool. And then, of course, that Church of England led to the Episcopal Church here. And then we have like the Methodist Church, which was an effort of John Wesley to reform the Church of England. But Wesley was just a difficult guy to live with or be with. I mean, he and his brother Charles, who was a very gifted man, but they formed a club at Oxford for people who wanted to deepen their spiritual life called the Holiness Club. Can you imagine what it would be like? Yeah, we want to join the Holiness Club? I don't think so. And the reason they were called Methodists was that John Wesley had a obsessive compulsive disorder, and he had a method for doing everything. And the word first came up, the people called Methodists. It was a derisive term for Methodist. Wesley came to the colonies before there was a United States, and he fell in love with a woman, or a woman fell in love with him, and they were going to get married, and at the last minute Wesley changed his mind. So the woman that he was engaged to got in a snit about that, and she wouldn't marry somebody else. And then she brought her new husband to church the next Sunday, and Wesley refused them communion when they came to the altar. And this woman's father sued John Wesley, which caused him to get on a boat and go back to England. When I was first moving my ordination into the United Methodist Church, and I had to read all this Methodist history and doctrine and policy, telling Wayne Day what I was discovering about Wesley from a personality standpoint, and Wayne said, you should never follow anybody who doesn't have a big failure in their life. I said, well, he's got one. Nevertheless, whatever these people became, whatever label they put on themselves, they differentiated themselves by what they believed, and they called that having faith. Are you a Baptist? Yes. How do you know? Well, because I believe in baptism by immersion, priesthood of the believer, all of the stuff, that I have faith in that. And if you didn't believe in any of that, clearly you weren't a Baptist. Now, sadly, along with this one account of superiority that either implied or clearly stated, I believe the right thing and you don't. I'm righter than you. My religion is the right one. I was explicitly taught this growing up as a Southern Baptist in Tennessee in the South. I mean, my mother fought with the Church of Christ people. We didn't have TV, so she got on the phone and fought about whether you could have instrumental music in the church or not. All that sort of stuff. It was just amazing. I was so lucky, out of all the religions in the world, to have been born into the right one. And if you didn't believe certain things, like the literal nature of the Bible or the virgin birth, then you weren't a true believer. You didn't have faith. You weren't orthodox. So having faith came to mean believing the right thing. I think orthodox, the word orthodox didn't start out meaning that at all. Orthodoxy has to do with the way we worship. We sing the doxology, and orthodox comes from that word. It has to do with right worship, the liturgy, the work, rather than what we assent to. So, over a period of time, faith came to mean a belief in what we couldn't prove to be true. So back in the Middle Ages, it took no effort to believe that the earth, that the sun went around the earth, and we have a 3-storied universe and all that sort of thing. But then came discoveries from archaeology and carbon dating and things like that, and it took great faith to believe the creation story in the face of all the evidence that was contrary to that. And many people still believe in that biblical worldview. They will say things, we even have this in this country, of people who say, I know all about science and all that, but I believe the Bible. I trust the Bible. I have faith in the Bible. And again, I want to say this is a very recent understanding of the word faith. It is as if God is interested in what we believe rather than how we behave. So the people who flew into the World Trade Center were people with great faith, strong beliefs. I said in here, couple of weeks ago that I know people who believe all the right things and who are still jerks. A person can believe all the things his or her group hold to and still be in bondage, still be miserable. A second meaning of the word faith is close to what it sounds like. It means faithfulness. Like in a marriage or in a committed relationship. Faithfulness is more than not having an affair or committing adultery. Pardon me. It means honoring your partner, putting your partner first, creating a cone of safety for your partner so that that person is free to be who he or she is. Primacy and security. That's a definition of faith. A lack of faith isn't a lack of belief, it's adultery. And very often Jesus used this language. He would speak of people. You're bringing me something. Okay. Thank you. We call it, this is the guy who stands on the mountain.
But it works. You can talk until dissolve in your throat.
And who was the guy who put pebbles in his mouth? Demosthenes. Is that it? I need to talk to him. We'll see if this works. So Jesus would refer to people in his time as being part of an adulterous generation. He didn't mean they were having sex orgies. He meant that they were not being faithful to God. God's vision for the world. So opposite of this kind of faith is idolatry. It being centered in something other than God. And I think this is what Ronner means by Christianity being the leading cause of atheism. Because it's possible to believe all the right things and still be unfaithful in this sense. One of you sent me this week a link to a most fascinating op-ed piece about the faith that the majority of American Christians claim to profess. And I will put that link in the summary that goes out. This faith, from a moral, theological perspective, is shockingly thin. Christian Smith, interesting name, a sociologist at Notre Dame, has been leading a long-term study of religious, spiritual lives of millennials. And he finds what he terms moralistic, therapeutic deism. This is a very important phrase to describe the religious beliefs of many people in our culture. Moral, therapeutic deism. It's displaced authentic Christianity as the true religion for American Christians. As we go along, before we're through with the Gospel of Thomas, I want to talk more about this and about what the religion that Jesus was in and practiced held to as a revealed religion. Because that's what the mystics are involved in. A revealed religion. Not something that's here, but something that is heartfelt. So, we have these two meanings of faith. We have faith means to assent to something. Faith means to be faithful to. And another meaning of faith is to have trust. Now, trust in the sense is not, I trust that something is technically, accurately, literally true. It means I trust that God is of a certain character and that I can place my faith here. Again, the opposite of this kind of faith is not lack of belief, but it is anxiety. A lack of faith is to be fearful. Growth in faith, growth in radical trust, lessens anxiety. One of the things that marks our culture is fear. Yet look at how much, and look at how much religion has been fear-based. If you don't do so-and-so, then bad things are happening to you. I want to just remind you of one of the most authentic sayings of Jesus. Look at the lilies. They neither work nor weave, and yet Solomon in all his magnificence was never dressed like one of them. So if God so gorgeously dresses the grass, how much more will God clothe you, O ye of little faith? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap. They do not have storehouses nor barns, yet God continues to feed them. How much more precious are you? Can you, by what you believe, add a single hour to your life? Therefore, I say to you, stop worrying. One of his favorite lines was, why are you so anxious? Fear not. I think one of the highest compliments people sometimes pay me is when they say, sometimes after one of these times together, you know, Bill, what you said today in your talk, I knew. You didn't tell me anything I didn't know, but you put it in words I hadn't been able to put it in for myself yet. And that was exactly my experience when I heard Ilia Delio for the first time, talking about the nature of the energy field in which we live. And she said, you know, it's expanding, creative, entangled, evolving. And she said, these words are good descriptors for whatever we mean when we use the word God. And further, if we're involved in this energy field, we are absolutely safe. And I went, yes, that's right. And I hadn't been able to say it like that, but it just resonated with something that was deep within me. A fourth way to understand what it means to have faith is a way of looking at things. In the scripture, the word is vivio. It's the word from which we get the word vision. Faith is a way of seeing. How we see determines how we respond to life. And this is what is at the root of my own definition of spiritual practice and the content of spiritual practice. It's related to our ability to see what is, our willingness to see what is. How do you see what's out there? Is it hostile? Is it threatening? Well, that's a point of view. It's a way of seeing things. You know, none of us, in case you didn't know this, is going to leave this globe alive. So cheer up. Now, if that's the case, and it is the case, how are we going to live? How do we want to see things? How do we want to comport our lives? Well, if we see things in a fearful way, we'll hit the other guy before he can hit us. And yet that is the very nature of so much religion in our world. God is going to get you, send you to hell. Some see what is indifferently. It doesn't really matter what's out there. The response to life and living this way of seeing provokes a kind of hedonism and consumerism that has become our religion. Get as much as you can while you can, because in the end it doesn't really matter anyway. But there's another way to see, and that is that the universe is life-giving. It's evolving, it's creative, it's nourishing, it's sustaining, it's gracious. And no, I do not believe this is a naive view. It knows about things like the Holocaust. It knows about all the violence there is in the world. This is a faith stance that acknowledges that how we see what is determines to how we respond to life. This is the way of seeing that sets us free. So it stands a chance, this faith, of creating in us a willingness to spend and to be spent for an overarching vision. It's the vision that Jesus had about the world. Okay, that's what faith is about. It's not about believing things to be true, but it's about seeing things in a way that contribute to our transformation. It's the kind of faith that Paul talks about when he talks about the fruits of the Spirit: freedom, joy, peace, and love. That's the life of faith. So I would say, as right now I'm your spiritual director, to pay attention to how much time you spend in peace, love, and joy. And what the concrete relationships are that you have with yourself and with other people, and if they're marked by peace, love, and joy. By the way, these ideas about faith I got from spending time with and reading the works of Marcus Borg. Marcus Borg is the one who said that the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith, according to Borg, is certitude. And more often than not in life and living, trouble is caused by people who are confident that they are right. So I want to tell you that the people in your life, particularly the ones who drive you the craziest, are always doing the best they can with the level of energy and awareness that they have at the moment. And they always are right. At least they think they are. And even Dr. Phil says, would you rather be right or related? Richard Rohr, in one of his daily meditations, said recently, if God wanted us to have evidence, rational proof, and perfect clarity, the incarnation of Jesus would have been delayed till the invention of audio recorders and video cameras. What the mystics of every tradition tell us is that the faith journey does not consist of certitude. The cloud of unknowing, for example. What the faith journey is about is a different way of seeing, a different way of knowing. We're offered a relationship, a dark journey, a path where we must discover for ourselves the faith required to live in an uncertain world. We need to know how to live without certitude. And in that sense, we are saved by faith. Make sense? People who have this faith stop slamming doors. And they never stop growing because they believe that there is a love that, though it protects us from nothing, sustains us in everything. The path that insists on certainty is not a happy path. So I think people who have the kind of faith I'm talking about are fun to live with. Staying immature is what keeps me young. Okay, so we're going to come back to this teaching, and I'm going to ask you, don't slam the door. Jesus, in what are considered by the scholars to be the most authentic sayings of Jesus, never refers to himself, almost never refers to himself. So this is not an authentic saying of Jesus, however, it grew out of experience people had with him. His early followers who assembled this collection of texts, these sayings, and its placement in the Gospel of Thomas makes it stand out, makes it very important. This teaching in various ways is in the canonical Gospels, particularly in Matthew and Luke. It's not in John, it's not in Mark, it's not in any of the writings of Paul, but you will find this referenced in the others. And one of the commentaries that I have on the Gospel of Thomas says, this may be the most important saying in the Gospel of Thomas when it comes to giving us information about Jesus' background. So I remember precisely where I was when I began to read the Gospel According to Jesus by Stephen Mitchell. It was Christmas, holiday break, December 1991. You can remember back to 1991? Sherry and I had gone to spend that holiday with my parents in Tennessee. And this was the book, just off the press, that I had taken with me to read. Now, at that time, there was no such thing as a Kindle. There were no e-readers. There were just books. I had never heard of Marcus Board or the Jesus Seminar. The Jesus Seminar, which originally consisted of 150 biblical scholars, was founded in 1985, but I had not heard of it. And I would not attend the Jesus Seminar until 2004, when you and I went together. 9/11 had not occurred. 9/11 occurred in 2001. I'd been teaching here the Mind and Spirit class for about 4 years, and I was not interested in any of this stuff at the time. I was interested in insights from psychology and spirituality, which I now see as one thing. But I didn't then. I thought we'd put them together in some way. But they're one thing. Finding the true self is the same as finding God. And I was interested in maybe helping people who were finding organized religion increasingly irrelevant to find some relevance for their lives. Now, there have been, as far as I know, 4 efforts to construct a different or another gospel of Jesus. This was the first one. Oh, I didn't know, it's not true. This is the second one I knew about. The first one that I know about, and I confess to you that I have not read it, is the one that was done by Thomas Jefferson, one of our former presidents. And what Thomas Jefferson did was to take a New Testament and a pair of scissors, and he cut out everything in the New Testament he didn't like. Mostly the miraculous stuff. I should read it and see what he cut out. Have any of you read it? You read it? Is it good?
It is what it is.
This is the first one I read. And so that's 2. In 1999, Robert Funk, who started the Jesus Seminar, he came out with, based on their scholarship and research, a gospel of Jesus that I have taught through here. And just last year, I found out that in 1883, Leo Tolstoy published the Gospel in Brief, which I had a hard time buying, but I now have a copy of it. I confess to you I've not read it, but I promise I will do so, and I will get back with a report on what I have read. But this book blew me away. You can get this book on a Kindle now, under $10. I ask you to read it. Just read it. Just read the introduction. One of the things that's fascinated the scholars who have focused on the historical Jesus has been an interest in knowing not only what Jesus likely did and said, but what shaped him, what shaped his message. Where did he get this stuff? Now, I cannot tell you the intense opposition that this kind of scholarship has been met by many people in Christian churches. You talked about slamming doors. The more that the faith of such people has been focused on doctrinal certainty, the more intense has been the opposition. And the easiest way for people to slam door in the face of this kind of inquiry is simply to marginalize the scholarship or the people involved in the scholarship. When I first started my own teaching about the Jesus of history in this place, I mentioned, of course, my sources: Robert Funk, Marcus Board, John Dominic Crossan, Shelby Spong, Joan Chittister. And I would get angry emails or responses from people. I think now I've offended everybody I can and they don't come anymore. But people would actually come up to me and say, you know that Crossan is not a Christian, don't you? Or Borg is not a Christian. You know that people at the Jesus Seminar, they're not real believers. I mentioned two of the most important books I think undergird our understanding of the history of the Bible and our understanding of God. They were written by Karen Armstrong, The Battle for God and the History of God. Wonderful, wonderful books. Not easy to read books, but wonderful books. And somebody said, you know that Karen Armstrong, she's an angry old nun. Stephen Mitchell, who wrote this book, is not a member of the Jesus Seminar. However, he is one of the most renowned linguistic scholars in the world on Middle Eastern religions, Middle Eastern language. And what he initially contributed, and looking back, this is so obvious, but it was like, oh wow, sure, that's true. What he initially contributed to my awareness was something I had not articulated, and namely that there is a huge difference between teachings about Jesus and teachings of Jesus. So, what did Jesus teach? It can be summarized like this, I think. The more we become aware of our identity as daughters and sons of God, the more we become like God, generous, compassionate, impartial, inclusive, and serene. These are the qualities that mark a teaching that's usually attributed to the historical Jesus, if it has these characteristics. Now, where and why did he make this emphasis? And Mitchell was the first one who articulated what is even obvious in the Christian scriptures. The kingdom of God Jesus talked about is not something out there or later or to come or that we get to when we die, but it's already here. We're already in it. It's already in us, and spiritual work is waking up to this reality. Jesus saw in every person he encountered an image of the God in which they were created. And one of the primary matters Jesus emphasized was that of forgiveness. What? Now don't slam the door. I'm going to quote Stephen Mitchell. Quote, the first thing we ought to realize about Jesus' life is that he grew up as an illegitimate child. You know, there was a dispute about Jesus' birth from the very beginning. That's why Matthew and Luke had these very inventive parables about the birth of Jesus at the beginning, and they're different. The birth stories are different in Matthew and Luke. In order to get the one story that we have, you got to kind of squish them together and leave some parts out and put some stuff like camels that are not in there, and Santa Claus and all that stuff. They're very different from each other. But even if you find that offensive to your religious history, if Jesus was born because Mary was impregnated by the Holy Spirit, during his lifetime, Jesus had no biological father to refer to. And in that world, in that time, family and belonging meant everything. Most males were referred to and identified by who their father was. Matthew, son of Levi. Judas, son of Iscariot. Simon, son of Jonah. In the Jewish-Christian disputes that began early on about this Jesus fellow, there was a rumor even then that Jesus was the illegitimate child of Mary and a Roman soldier. Now, this undoubtedly was a taunt that was leveled at him throughout his entire life, and he no doubt knew the force and hurt of this phrase as a form of deep personal pain. And that perhaps was his motivation that sent him seeking beyond his own family of origin, to the ground of his being, which drove him into the presence of an Abba, a Father that knew him deeply and intimately. What Mitchell sees, and I encourage you to read the book, as I said, is that Jesus experienced being marginalized in his own home community is the root of his compassion for others similarly marginalized. Women, the poor, the diseased. Being made fun of for his birth origins helped to soften Jesus' own heart toward others who were mocked, despised, and rejected. I believe Jesus' birth was as natural as yours or mine. What he did with his birth and what gave him his drive for and into another and deeper identity was one he taught with our identity as well. So that in a symbolic sense, we all derive from a virgin birth. I'm going to try to put that another way. To believe that we are primarily physical beings is to prostitute ourselves to the world. Is to rent ourselves out to the world. Jesus moved to the point where he recognized only the spiritual nature of others because that's what he experienced for himself. So people had an experience with Jesus, and as I've mentioned this a lot, when I went to seminary, my professor said Jesus taught in parables, and the early church taught in parables about Jesus. So the early church created a parable about Jesus, and we know this parable as the temptation experience. Jesus comes out of wherever he comes from. He gets baptized by John the Baptist, and then he is driven into the wilderness. And he's tempted by the divider, the diablo, the dividing one. Each temptation begins with a phrase. You know what it is? If you are the Son of God. Jesus came out of that experience saying, I have discovered that I am the child of God, and so are you, and so are you, and so are you. When we slam the door on that identity, we exclude ourselves from his embrace. So I'll repeat the summary of Jesus' teaching. The more we become aware of our identity as daughters and sons of God, the more we become like God, generous, compassionate, impartial, inclusive, and serene. So in order to show up for that, we have to cut the ties that bind us. Perhaps it's to parents in a home back there somewhere, either in anger or an idealized form. Perhaps it's to someplace out there we hope to get to someday. Perhaps it's to any one of the multitude of things that distracts us from being present. Maybe it's the addictions that numb us. We have a multitude of ways of slamming doors. I'm guessing that's true for you, because it's true for me. Thich Nhat Hanh said that they didn't start teaching meditation practice until the young monks stopped slamming doors. Now, when we do stop slamming and do take up our practice, what are we hoping for? I believe that every person in this room, just like every person on this planet, desires a completely non-judgmental, compassionate affirmation of their existence as being absolutely worthy of life and love. What we are seeking is what we already know. It is to hear what Jesus heard. I'm paraphrasing from Matthew now. This is my beloved daughter, my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. chosen and marked by my love, the delight of my life. That's a mantra. Memorize it. So when our practice is being effective, how do we know? Well, maybe it's when people walk up and say, how come you're so happy? Or maybe it's when we really embrace beyond whatever doctrinal, denominational, religious beliefs we hold to, that our real religion is kindness and generosity and justice. Maybe it's when we become aware that we are working alongside of, within sacred mystery, co-creating, making real the new world Jesus envisioned. In my reading this week, I ran across a reference to a 5th century desert father, John Cassian. And he was once asked, how do you know when your monks' meditative practices are being effective? And he had a wonderful answer. He said, I know they're being effective when they sing the Psalms as if they were composing them. Now, I don't know the tune yet, but I know the words. I am God's child, and so are you. Sing that as if you wrote it. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargoes, so watch yourself, and I will see you here next week. Thank you.